Okay, so hi, Corinne. I won't do the intro because I know that I won't do it justice. You are like so many different things in my mind. Do you want to give an intro to who you are and what you're about?
Yeah, I think I always ask the same thing when I'm talking to people, like, oh, can you introduce yourself? And then and they're like, wait, what do you want to know? And I'm like, well, like, do you have a dog? Or like, do you really like cheese? Or like, what is actually the thing that, we should know about you? And so my
Yeah,
name is Corrine Malcolm. Um, Explaining what I do for work to anyone like over the age of 50 is quite complicated. Like my parents' friends are like, wait, what does Corinne do for a job? And so I am a professional ultra runner. For those of you watching on YouTube, there's like a whole rack of shoes directly behind me. Um,
okay.
but I also coach trail and ultra athletes as well as road runners. I work as a kind of a media personality doing commentary within the sport of trail and ultra running. What else? Oh, I've got a really cool dog. She's the best. I love her. She's my best friend. I do actually really like cheese. So does my dog, which is excellent. We like are on the same level at all times.
Nice.
Um, but yeah, I joke that I'm like kind of treading water a lot, just like flailing forward. I'm 34 and I still don't know what I'm going to be when I grow up, and I think that that is okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that was actually kind of one of the things. Well, I listened to your podcast. You did you mention the podcast?
Oh,
You
I'm
do
a
Trail Society.
podcaster.
Yeah. I listened to that a lot. And I guess what like drew me about your character as someone to listen to is your complete openness, it seems, to try anything career-wise that is thrown at you. Like even from you've talked about that, I mean, we will cover this in a second, but going from, well, your first opportunity to pursue biathlon professionally, you completely just, oh yeah, I'll ditch the degree and I'll go do this. That's great. And then moving on to that into the ultra trail world. And then I believe you ended up in commentating completely accidentally as well. But hey, another great opportunity. Yeah, I'll go do that. Like, I just love your attitude. If someone gives you an opportunity and you think it's interesting, you go do it. And I think that's quite rare, especially, yeah, like you have a lot of different passions and you're not afraid to pursue all of them instead of feel like you should be in a rigid line in one career.
Yeah, I'm not very good at like playing it safe. Also, like I think I was talking to a friend about this recently. Like my mom and I are super similar. She's an emergency medicine doctor, but when we moved to Wisconsin when I was like in first grade, there were no violin teachers in the town that we moved to, and she had started playing the violin with me the year before because I was terrified to go to the teacher by myself. And she started a strings program. And so like my mom is an emergency medicine doctor, but she also like helped to like write a kid's book and then also teaches violin lessons now, and like it just like it doesn't make any sense, but it was just like it does in a way completely make sense at the same time. And so I don't think I'm afraid from like a I'm not afraid to stay safe in the sense of like this is a safe career and it's going to bring X, Y, and Z goals. um and I'm also just like maybe I'm not very good at doing one thing. And I used to joke that it's because I don't like any of the jobs I do enough to do them full time. But it turns out I just don't think I could do one thing, even if I
Right.
really, really liked it.
Yeah. So I guess that came from your mum kind
I
of
think so.
attitude.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's just really refreshing to witness because I don't want to criticize people in my bad example, but a lot of the like I went to the running club at my uni and I guess what I'm used to coming across in the running world is people who fit a certain kind of ideology of what that should be. I'm not kidding. I think it must have been about 90% of people at the running club were either in veterinary or medicine. And it was like very clear, like what route they were going on. And I don't naturally fit into that. I don't think I'm a bit more like you. I'm not as confident as you with pursuing like everything. Like I that's why I look up to it, I suppose, is what I mean. But yeah, it's nice to see someone who doesn't feel the need to fit in like one box. It's really nice.
Would say it's very chaotic. It's definitely not like
Yeah.
a routine or a safe way of doing things. And I think that I've just always been that way. Like we joked, like in our family that while I'm like not afraid, like I don't like conflict. Like I'm not like I don't like, like ruffling feathers in a lot of ways, but I also like don't tolerate kind of BS, like or
Yeah.
nonsense. And so it's like I've been that way since I was a kid. Like I've got two brothers and they would get like student of the month every year from 6th grade through 12th grade. Once a year they'd both get student of the month. I never once from 6th grade to 12th grade got student of the month. And it wasn't that I was a bad student. I just think I was like a difficult kid. And I think I'm definitely a difficult adult in that regard too. And so
Yeah.
it's just like has become a natural pipeline into doing what I do now.
Yeah, exactly. That actually segues quite nicely, if you don't mind, into talking about the UTMB stuff. Because
Totally.
difficult, I think that's the wrong word. Difficult, you're just very bright and outspoken, is how I see it, which is the correct way for someone with an opinion to be. So yeah, do you want to tell a bit of the about I will get it all wrong. I don't know enough about it. Do you want to say a bit of the background on that and what happened?
Yeah, so for those of you who follow like the UTMB ecosystem, it's been a growing, evolving race organization, right? We all knew it as like the one race in Chamonix around the Mont Blanc as like the championship race. Now it's a full series. There are races going on like every other weekend, I think year round across the world. So a lot of growing pains kind of ensued during that. And I happened to be the like basically the female English commentator. So I was doing some races remotely for UTMB and then I was working UTMB finals. Like that started by accident basically after running well during a race called TDS in 2019. I came into the studio 2019. Yeah, 2018. 2018. Like came into the studio and they just like had me back every year after that type of thing. Um
Yeah.
but I also like as a female runner, as someone who cares a lot about my they're my colleagues, right? Like the people racing at the front of these races are my friends, my colleagues, my teammates, oftentimes. And it's really easy when you're not being careful for the race, like the race commentary and the video to follow just the front of the race, which is inherently the men's race. Unless there was like one exceptional runner way off the front of the women's race. And so, I guess it was last year, not long from right now actually, where we had UTMB finals and we had talked ahead of time about being really cognizant about making sure that we were giving the women's race as much airtime that if we were covering the top three men, we were covering the top three women. If we were covering the top 10 men, we were covering the top 10 women. And we got to the end of the final race of the race weekend being like UTMB, like the crown jewel, 100-mile race, that circumnavigates
Yeah.
Mont Blanc. And we had, inherently been covering the top 10 men on their way into Chamonix, into the finish line. And I was like, well, we're covering the top 10 men. We have to stay to cover the top 10 women. That's not us going above and beyond. That's not us, you know, going out of our way. That is like the bare minimum. Like like we respect these women and what they've done and their accomplishments. So my co-commentator and I, Keith, stayed on and we stayed on for the top 10 women. It wasn't that like big of an ask.
Yeah.
And what that meant and what that made is that, it was a bit of a stir because none of the other channels stayed on because it's streamed in 6 to 8 languages depending on the year. And then none of like the background kind of help people from the tech side of things stayed on either. And so what that meant is that Keith and I were alone in the studio, like cheering on the top 10 women, and it received, positive attention, right? That we stayed on, we supported these women, we brought them home. Um, but that did not reflect well on UTMB, and that was kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back a little bit, I think, with the organization. And um,
Okay.
basically they said, hey, like we can't have someone that, is supposed to be representing us speaking out against us, making us maybe making us look bad in any way, shape, or form. And well, I think I did a really good job being professional on air, like, holding the line, there to support the race, there to support the runners. I'm not an employee of UTMB. I'm contracted as like a day rate commentator. So I
Yeah.
didn't feel like it was my job to represent them 24/7, 365 days a year.
Mm.
And they, I think, had that perspective that I was not an employee, but that I was a spokesperson for them. And so that was a parting of the ways. And I joked in the aftermath of that, like, like you took away my microphone, but you handed me a megaphone. Like, this is going to look
Yeah.
bad for you guys and look great for me. And
Yeah.
sure enough, that's exactly what happened. And I
Yeah.
mean, I like a lot of the individuals who work for the organization. I know a number of them super well, and I've worked on projects with many of them, even since parting ways last year. But it
Yeah.
caused a big kind of stir within the community because I think having someone like myself who kind of diplomatically, like on my podcast, in other media ways, just wanted to kind of not push back, but reflect on the growth in the sport, reflect on if it was a positive trajectory for the sport. Talk about like the discrepancy and disparity that would come about with the new qualification system, right? Because if you
Yeah.
have to travel to do a UTMB race, that's a lot of money. So you're going to create a haves and
Yeah.
have-nots, people who can afford to be part of the ecosystem and the people who cannot. And that is trail, while it's not as cheap as many of us think it is. You don't just quote need a pair of running shoes. It is generally speaking something that anyone can do locally, regionally, nationally, internationally. Um, but it is a huge investment for many people. It's not cheap. Going to a race is expensive. And an ecosystem like UTMB kind of promoted that, like made that more of a thing. Um, and that those were my concerns. And I tried to voice them in a way that was diplomatic, that reflected both sides of the argument type of thing. But it was not seen that way by UTMB, unfortunately, at that time. And yeah, it caused a huge stir. And I'm still I'm still working with them on random things, trying to make the race better for everyone. But it's a lot of it's very much like just kind of chipping away at a block while doing other stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess I just find it confusing that if
Yeah.
that had been a discussion before the race, that needed to happen. I don't know. There have been a few negative press incidences, even that hit my screen, and I don't try and keep up to date with any of that about UTMB now. And it's
Mhm.
now, yeah, I can be outspoken about it. They don't know me, but I don't want to race there.
Mhm.
I don't. Even if I could at the moment, I don't want to go because I know it's not the attitude to women exactly. It's just how far behind they seem to be in their attitude comparatively, not only with the rest of society in general, but in the trail ultra world. Like their pregnancy deferral system, that took a long time to get, and I'm sure it's still not perfect. And then, was it that race? I just listened to a podcast episode with you. I think it might have actually been a different race
No, I
where
think it
there
was
was,
was was Sophie Power. So Sophie she is responsible for she races in the UK, and we just talked
yeah,
about her experience recently at UTMB with menstrual products not being widely
yes,
available, and the
yeah,
women's only bathroom that was supposed to be allocated to them was actually not women's only because
yeah,
male racers were using it. And this is not like a porta potty. This is like a place where they could go and change, and they could like have their own space was being utilized by male racers, which is not ideal. And that's like low hanging fruit, right? Those are
yeah,
easy things to implement, not just at your championship race, but across all your races. And it's not going above and beyond for what should and could make up 50% of your runners.
yeah,
And so that is like kind of a big hurdle, particularly when they have the resources available to them, right? They have the Women's Equality Working Group within the PTRA or the Pro Trail Running Association. They have athlete groups they consult with. Like I'll have a meeting with them in like 2 weeks' time with women from the PTRA and some other folks talking about like, hey, these are the things we would like to address for next year. Like they have resources. They work with Sophie. Sophie was one of the people
Yeah.
that like helped get the pregnancy deferral policy passed. They work with Black Trail Runners, with Sabrina Pace Humphreys from the UK. So they have connections to
Yeah.
people and organizations who are doing really good work. And it's just there seems to be a lag in being able to implement that stuff. And it's one of those things where like obviously change takes time and there's work being done, but it's like there are things that could be done pretty quickly. And that is like what we're
Yeah.
still like trying to figure out and push for. But you're right, like there were a lot of people last year who didn't go to UTMB finals because they felt
Yeah.
off or bad about some of the things happening
Mm.
within the organization. And there are people who had to go because our contracts as professional runners in the trail space, like definitely UTMB is a part of that.
Yeah.
And then you have people who just, it doesn't impact them. It's not something that they care about particularly, and it's a goal race. And so there's a smattering effect there, but
Yeah.
it's definitely, this time last year when everything kind of fell apart was like a super hurtful time period.
Yeah.
Um, but there is a really amazing like rallying cry within the trail and ultra community. I feel it really strongly whenever I'm at a race. I was just at a race this past weekend and um, got to run into so many amazing individuals who see the work that we're trying to do and are excited about it and are so supportive. And so when there are days where I feel like I'm banging my head against the walls of my office, um, and it feels pointless and meaningless, and I'm like, I just want to quit everything. Going to a race event and like meeting those people who do
Yeah.
see the work you're doing and do really care, that makes it all worth it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it is, yeah, please Kat, continue. We do all appreciate it. It's just, yeah, I would be happy to go if they got their act together a bit quicker. But I mean, it was mostly, I'd already heard negative press about kind of their Damien Hall, for example,
Mm-hmm.
of the Green Runner group. I've heard a lot of negative press about UTMB through them. And it's right that we get to hear about it as well. But some of their sponsors that they're taking on are very, let's say, not the trail ethos that we would like to be supporting one of the major races. So it's just, yeah, it's a few different things that have added to it. But then you were kind of just the cherry on top for me. That was just like, well, the opposite of the cherry on top. That's a positive expression. But it's like too far. Essentially acting as firing someone for being too outspoken when in fact what they did was a very positive action that is needed. It is
Mm-hmm.
so simply needed that, women are 50% of the population, you're not covering them. That was just insane to me. But I won't, yeah, I won't
Oh, I
rant
know. You're like, I'm preaching to the choir here, and that is
about
okay.
it. Yeah, yeah. Well, please continue. Um, but yeah, would you mind just actually going on to your sponsor? You're sponsored by Adidas Terex, I believe. How did that come about?
Yeah, I am finishing up year 6 right now with the brand, which is pretty amazing to watch the brand grow so much, I think, in those 6 years too. I was not part of the first group of trail runners that came on. Um, I think I was a year or two into them really developing their trail team globally. But I had kind of been sponsored at a national level by Solomon from like 2017 and 2018, and had a really had really good years in 2017 and 2018, including finishing top 10 at Western States and then finishing on the podium at TDS. And so those were, things were looking up. And being nationally sponsored is a bit different than being making a global team just in the amount of support you can get. And so while I really liked our team manager at Solomon in the US, was looking for a little bit more support to be able to travel to more races, to race a little bit more internationally, all that kind of stuff. Um, and so had been talking to a gal who now is actually like working as an agent. She was not working as an agent at the time. Her name is Kelly Newlin. She runs a group called she's a chef actually, in Boulder, Colorado, called RAD, or Real Athlete Diets. And so she is really immersed in the trail and ultra space and the sports space because she was working all these events. Like she'd be hired by the brand manager and then she'd be meeting all the athletes at these events. And so she became really well connected within the sport. And so I was actually talking to her about just kind of my sponsorship woes of feeling like, I didn't want to take a contract where I was locked in to one brand, but, had very little actual monetary support from them. And Adidas was looking to expand a little bit more. They were looking to take on another American, like another female American trail runner. And I came up in that conversation, which is I feel very, very grateful for that my name was floated during that time. And um, the guy who was at that time the like just the marketing director for trail is now the head of global marketing at Adidas Terrex. His name's Rob, and he liked that I came from a skiing and biathlon background. He thought that it was really cool.
Okay. Yeah.
He liked what I was doing as a coach. So it wasn't just about my race results. My race results were a piece of that puzzle, but really it was that I was already at that time doing a bunch of other stuff that
Mhm.
the way I came, the way I showed up in the sport and in the space was not just as an athlete, but that, I had the science background, that I was coaching at a high level, all these kind of pieces of the puzzle he was really drawn to. And so got a contract super late in the kind of contract negotiation window. I think I signed just after Thanksgiving, which felt a little
Okay.
stressful. And started with them, I guess that'd be January 2019, and I've been with them ever since. Um, but yeah, I feel very fortunate because people think that a lot of running contracts are just about your results. And there are people who get signed purely because of their results. But even now, more so than ever, they are looking to fill niches or stereotypes or whatever you want to call it within their team, right? It's like,
Yeah.
we need someone that fits this space. We need someone that fits that space. So it's not just about, wow, they can stand on the top of the Western States podium, or wow, they are going to be competitive at UTMB. That is an important piece of the puzzle, but it's also like, hey, this person has this, and this going on. This sets them apart from another, 20 something year old who is top 10 at Western States. And so I feel fortunate that Kelly floated my name and that Rob
Yeah.
was like, yeah, her. Um, and then very grateful that I got injured in 2020 during the pandemic. And instead of, cutting my contract or like a big injury, I had a stress fracture in my pelvis. Um, Instead of cutting my contract or re-signing me for a lower amount when that contract was coming up, they gave me a small raise and re-signed me for another 3 years. And so, I feel
Mhm.
very grateful for those opportunities to race for a global team and that's the coolest thing about I think Adidas Terrex is not necessarily like the product's great, but it's my teammates. I have really amazing teammates, both that are North American based and that are based in Europe predominantly. And I feel very fortunate that the team component is such a huge deal for
Mhm.
Adidas, getting us together at races specifically or for a training camp. And they're people that I care about immensely. It's not so much that I necessarily like, I'm like, oh, I recognize that it's not so much about the brand, but it's about the people. Um, and I feel very fortunate that I have a slew of teammates who I consider incredibly close friends and people that independent of brands changing down the road for any of us because it's every year to 3 years people are like either re-signing or moving on. um if anything was to change, I was talking to one of my teammates yesterday and I was like, like if it comes a time where like we're not on like the same three stripe team, like I'm still your teammate for forever. And I think that that feeling is mutual amongst many of the people that I get to run with, and it's super cool. We all are running around like little matching. This year we were pumpkins. Last year we were grapes. Whatever the team color is. You
Nice.
can find us because we travel in a pack of like 20, and we're all like decked out head to toe, very identically.
Yeah. That's really nice. Is it Abby Hall who's also on your team?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
got to give her
Okay.
a big hug on Saturday and have breakfast with her
Oh,
on Sunday in Arizona. And I think part of me coming onto the team stemmed a little bit from Abby as well, that we had become friends
yeah.
in 2018. I think we met in 2017, became friends in 2018. And then I joined her on the team in 2019 because I think that her first year was 2018. Um,
Right.
and she's a wonderful person.
Yeah.
I love her. I coach her husband Cordis. Um,
Oh,
and it's just like yeah, they're really special people. And yeah, she's a person that keeps you very grounded. She's got a
yeah.
lot of big emotions and um is one of my favorite people to just like noodle ideas with, either when we're running or when we're eating lots of snacks. But she's a key member of the team. And yeah, came back from a big injury in the last year, which we're all super excited that she's back running and running at full strength.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess that's part of what it is. For these big brands, I pronounce it Adidas. I've always done that. It's Adidas. But like they are having to think about, like you said, it's not the race results of the athletes necessarily. I'm sure that's a factor, but it's I mean, it is part of their marketing strategy, but I'm sure they're grateful for it. But it's the whole person people now want to look up to. Like I'm sure having a social media following is helpful in gaining contract these days. But also just, yeah, you have so many plates that you're spinning and people look up to that and are interested in the other things you're doing as well, which must help not only for your life balance, but it must help the brand as well. Say, hey, look, we've got these really cool people on our team, essentially buy our stuff in a good way. But and it works because you do
Yeah,
have a massive following. That's for a reason. So
it creates buy-in, and then like our race results create like validity, right? Like us running
yeah,
well in the product creates like validity for the brand. Like, oh yeah, they are trail shoes. Oh yeah, they are trail packs. Oh yeah, like the materials must be decent because these athletes are running well in it. And then you also want to buy into like the storyline of these athletes. And sometimes it's not just there is and I think that maybe that's the difference between like marketing to women and marketing to men. I think that there's probably like this like men's sports lore, like, oh, like he can score touchdowns, he must be talented, or like, oh, he runs fast, he's talented. And
yeah,
women, and maybe it's a double standard, but I think when you market to women, and it's how I experience the sport, is like, yeah, I was again at this race this weekend, and someone asked me about Lauren Puretz, who was like charging from fifth to third. Um, and I was like, cool, I'm going into private commentary mode now that I've dropped out of the race. And I was like, yeah, I was like, Lauren's amazing. She's a mom of two. She's an OB-GYN, so she like works as a doctor full time. Like,
yeah,
she's like always kind of knocking at the door. Like, it wasn't just like, oh yeah, she's fast. It's like, oh yeah, she's fast and like
yeah.
this, and this. And so I do think that we have a lot of like respect and admiration and excitement for them as humans.
Mm.
Even, we're excited for them to run fast and to run well. But we're also excited for them as people. And that's a very cool part of our sport.
Yeah, definitely. I think I hadn't thought about it in that way before, but I think that's bang on the money. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I look up to people who I just think are really cool people in the sport. Even I like Courtney DeWalter's story. I think I'm not going to get this right either, but I think she was like a biology
Yeah,
teacher
she's a school
and
teacher.
yeah, I just that's just so cool to me. So going to one of the greatest ultra runners in the world from being a school teacher, that's really, really awesome.
Yeah.
So yeah, bang on the money. Okay, I have so many questions, but I want to filter them down. Could you tell me a bit about your degree? You studied physiology, right?
Yeah, so I did my undergrad in Bozeman, Montana. It took 7 years because I dropped out of school in the middle to do biathlon, where I skied in a circle for an Olympic cycle. But I studied yeah, so I studied well, our degree was technically called um exercise science with a concentration in human like health and performance, I think is what it was like. It was a
Okay.
very long name, but essentially
Yeah.
it was physiology and applied physiology. And most of my classmates were, we didn't have like a pre-physical therapy degree.
Okay.
That's a graduate program in the US. And so
Right.
most of my classmates were going to become physical therapists occupational therapists, etc. They were going to work with humans, but they needed an undergraduate degree before they went to grad school. Um,
Right.
I was kind of the weird one in the sense that I was like, I want to do science. Like, I really like science. I want to be in a lab. I want to make people better, faster, stronger, fitter, etc. So I spent most of my degree like in a lab, wherever anyone would let me do anything. I had a
Well,
bunch of really amazing advisors who would just like let me both officially and kind of unofficially work on research projects with them. Sometimes it was for
yeah.
credit. Sometimes it was just like, oh, Corinne will show up at 6 a.m. to do this test. It's fine. Um, which was great. Like they just like let me kind of loose in the sense and explore what made me really happy and excited. Um, and then once I finished that degree, I went and started what was an accelerated PhD at the time. Did not finish, left because it just was a bad fit between me and my advisor. But went to grad school in Vancouver, British Columbia, and for 2 years studied um, what they would call environmental physiology. So the program was biomedical physiology, and most of the labs did like cellular work. They were studying like cardiac cells, and there's a spinal cord research group that was really cool. But our lab did environmental physiology. So we specifically studied things like heat and altitude and extreme cold.
Okay.
And so
Yeah.
we tested products and developed products with companies like a running jacket for Lululemon or a survival suit for maritime boats. So suits that if the boat was going down, you could get in the water and survive for 48 hours. So we did
Yeah.
a lot of testing for organizations and brands. And we also were looking at ways to understand human physiology better when it came to heat acclimation, altitude acclimation, that kind of stuff. And so
Yeah.
super nerdy, but it also was like so cool because it applied so much to um, the sports stuff I was interested in. Like we did a field project with a local ultra marathon that was super cool to be part of. Um, I studied heart rate variability or HRV, which is now in like everyone's Whoop and Garmin and Aura
Yeah.
Ring, all that kind of stuff. I looked at recovery metrics, kind of pre and post ultramarathon, and looked at how age related to that. But we did once again get to explore everything. And my only shift there was I was more and more interested in like human health in general. So when I came into the program, the goal actually I was supposed to study here in the US, we have wildland firefighters who work on huge wildfires in the US
Yeah.
because we have um, a lot of like federal land and have fires every year. And so my hope actually had been to work with a group of wildland firefighters to study their lung health during the season. So to look
Oh.
at how their lung health changed over the season and how much of their lung health recovered when they were off fire or when they had time off. Um, and so started with that project, and then it morphed into doing more field work, looking at hydration in ultra marathons, just based on like kind of the people I'd put together. So a lot of random stuff. And as we mentioned at the very beginning of this interview, I'm really bad at doing one thing. And when it comes to doing a PhD, you're supposed to become an
Oh,
expert in like
yeah.
one horribly specific topic. Like you're like, I'm the
Yeah.
expert in, this specific hormone that's released when you're thirsty. Like, great, like that's so cool. But it's like there's so many other things out there that are so much more
Yeah.
interesting. And so unless you have a really broad topic area, you kind of get pigeonholed into being like the expert at one thing. And that
Mm.
I think was definitely going to become a struggle for me. But fortunately, in a way, my advisor was going through a really hard time and was not a great advisor.
Mm.
And so a bunch of us left the lab, either transferred labs or left the program entirely. And
Mm.
so at that point in time, my running was going really well as well as like kind of
Mm.
taking off. And so it was actually a nice transition period where I pivoted from staying in that graduate program to just like giving more to my coaching and more to my running. And um,
Yeah.
now here we are.
Yeah. Wow.
It's a
I guess
lot of
it,
science words.
yeah, well, it was a lot of science, but I think I mostly followed. I won't pretend I followed all of it. But the projects you mentioned, I don't know if these were just example, like real examples or not, but like say the coat for Lululemon and then the boat, like such varied projects, but all I can see the link there. But that sounded to me just out of my own curiosity, sorry, from my background, but how did they work? Because that sounded more like material science to me. Or were these companies coming to you with materials they had already, formed and patented, and then you were testing them on your physiology stuff that I won't even
Yes.
try and phrase
So we were
correctly?
doing the human element of their testing. So for example, like Lululemon was coming up with kind of a patterning to their jackets that they wanted to understand better which panels should be insulated and how they should be insulated. Designing a jacket that would be warm but breathable, where athletes wouldn't be getting chilled if they had to stop and then start again. And so we did it was my friend's master's project actually, which is really cool. Because I'm not Canadian, I couldn't hold they have these really cool grants that are industry grants, and I couldn't hold a grant like that as a
Mhm.
non-Canadian, but I could work on these projects. And so it was one of my really good friends. It was her master's thesis project, and so we spent a ton of time at Lululemon's headquarters, which are in Vancouver,
Yeah.
and they have a cool lab. It's called the White Space Lab, and basically they made like I think 11 iterations of the jacket, and our job was to design tests for them and then run the tests that would look at both like the thermal comfort that the test subject was experiencing and also like the actual metric, like the actual values coming out of it, like were they getting cold. So we're
Mhm.
taping sensors all over their bodies. Actually, a guy who now works for Adidas Terex um, was in the lab at that point in time, was working for Lululemon. And so we've gotten to reconnect over the last 2 years because he's like shown
Yeah.
up at our team races working on projects. But he was 3D printing these little holders to put these sensors in between layers of the garment. So in between like their base layer and the jacket to look at the climate that would like develop while they were running. Like how like humidity changes, moisture changes, etc. Um, so yeah, so basically the product was was not necessarily being manufactured yet, but it was either prototyping or deciding which way to make the product better. And then we'd run the physiological testing. So the emergency suit testing, these companies make emergency suits and then they say it'll keep you alive for 24 hours or 48 hours or 72 hours,
Mhm.
but they need it third party tested to
Yeah.
to say, yes, it will keep your core body temperature above,
Yeah.
X degrees for 48 hours. So we would construct a giant pool in our lab and get generally like college age boys who would do anything for a little bit of cash. Um, and
Yeah.
we'd put them in a suit for 48. Well, they didn't make it 48 hours. These suits did not pass the 48-hour mark. But our job was to make sure that we were monitoring their vitals, right? We were monitoring heart rate, we were monitoring core body temperature, we were monitoring extremity temperature, etc. And so as like an environmental lab, our specialty is, monitor in a lot of ways is monitoring changes in body temperature,
Yeah.
and other associated kind of parameters. And so yeah, we were running basically like validity third party tests for some companies who had like fully formed products. And then the project
Right.
with Lululemon was a better example of like they know what they want the end product to be, i.e., a jacket, but they're not
Mm.
sure if there is a best way to make the jacket. And so
Yeah.
we it was a blinded test where it's like because I was in the chamber every day with the test subjects, like I didn't know what jacket they were in. And
Oh, okay.
I didn't know going into the testing phase how the jacket paneling was different. So
Yeah.
I wouldn't know if they were in, A, B, C, D, E, F, and I wouldn't know how F was different from E because my job was to
Yeah.
be in the chamber every day. Um,
Yeah.
in a giant jacket with these test subjects.
Yeah.
And so we were collecting the physiological elements of it to then
Mm.
inform, okay, jacket B performed the best and B created this type of paneling and this paneling worked because of X, Y, and Z factor. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's not material science, but it's basically taking material science and turning it into applied physiology.
Yeah. Well, that sounds like wildly interesting. Was it like, do you plan on pursuing that later on, or yeah, like, how do you feel about that now? How did you leave that?
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like if I wanted to work in the industry, like basically finishing out that degree would be important potentially to like getting a job. Like we like living here in
Mm,
Seattle, like Brooks is here.
mm,
Portland's not that far away. In Portland, there's Nike, there's Adidas Terrex, there's Lululemon's shoes are down in Portland, but their
mm,
materials are up in Vancouver. So we're kind of like in the belt of a lot of major companies. So if I wanted to
mm,
work in the industry, in a scientific setting, yeah, completing that degree would allow for that. And so I've got to meet a number of researchers within the Canadian kind of research system at Further this spring. I was there to crew a really good friend of
mm.
mine, which is a big
Yeah.
Lululemon project where they ran around in a circle for
Uh,
6 days.
oh, I do know
Um,
it. Yeah.
yeah, so there's a bunch of researchers there. And so I got to meet with a bunch of those
Mm,
people. And definitely there's likely some space if I wanted to, in a year or two, come into one of their labs to finish out that degree, it'd be
yeah.
possible.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's just, yeah, another plate to spin, but it does sound like
Mhm.
really, really interesting. I'm a little bit jealous, but my degree was really boring. Well, not
There's always
boring, that was
time. There's always
but
new
yeah,
chapters.
it's time, always time. Probably switch. Okay, what do I want my next question to be? Because I have several. Could you tell me a little bit about your dog and also how you met your now husband? Is that right, Stephen?
Mhm.
Yeah, could you tell me a bit about that?
Yeah, so Stephen and I went to school together. Actually, we went to college together. He was a year ahead of me, but he grew up ski racing with many of the women that I was on the cross country ski team with. And so he would just like he was one in a bunch of my science classes because we were in the same major. And two, he knew a bunch of the gals that were freshmen with me. And so he was just like there and around, and we became
Mm,
really good friends. Um,
yeah.
which was awesome. And he was racing bikes professionally at the time. And
Wow.
so when we both left school effectively to pursue sport, so he was going to school just in the falls, just for the fall semester, and I was going to school not at all. It became a person that we could both like vent to in a lot of ways. Even if we only saw each other,
Yeah.
once or twice a year when I'd come through town as friends. Um, it was a person that understood exactly what I was going through, but wasn't in my sport. And
Mhm.
so we became like a support system for one another in the sense that like I understood like the frustrations of how an Olympic team is named,
Yeah.
or, not meeting your goals in the World Cup or whatever it was. So he became a person that I'd been really good friends with. And then we were like supporters of one another from afar. Um, and then when I moved back to Bozeman, kind of between like towards the end of that Olympic cycle, and effectively moved in to his house that he was living, like he was living with two of my really good friends. And he was leaving for Switzerland for 6 weeks to go race bikes or to go to a training camp and then to go to an early season race. And so I moved into their house and I was like, I will find a place to live in the next 6 weeks, like I promise. Um, and so did. And then we like probably officially started dating that like winter, spring, and then moved back in with them for the summer because my lease ended. And then we all got evicted together in August of that summer. And so I guess there were four of us in the house. So we all found a new house to live in together. Um,
Wow.
and it's hilarious because our pitch to landlords was that we know it's only a 3 bedroom and we know there's four of us, but like one
Mm.
of us is always gone because like
Oh,
Steven was racing his bikes all summer. I was still ski racing. So I was gone a lot in the winter. So it was like this kind of hilarious, like one of us is generally not around. So it's really like there's only three roommates.
yeah.
And found a landlord who didn't think we were crazy and like let us rent for them. But yeah, we've been together since 2013 and we've been
Mm,
married for 3 years now. Um, which is crazy
mm,
and been, kind of around the Western US together. We moved to the West Coast, or we moved from Montana to Washington/Vancouver together. He was still racing bikes, and I was going to grad school. Um, like went from there to San Francisco together when he got into medical school.
yeah.
And now we're in Seattle as he is finishing his medical residency. So it's been a wild ride, but we've known each other since we were like 18. So that also
Yeah.
is kind of crazy. Um, and then I was joking when my mom was in town last weekend, and I was like, Steven, what did I want in college? And he was like, you wanted a Tacoma, which is a truck, and a dog. And I was like, and what do I have? And he's like, you have a Tacoma and you have a dog. And I was like, yes. He's like, I'm just a means to an end. And I was like, yes. No, but I've wanted a dog since I was like in, I don't know, since I was like 4 or 5, probably. Like I asked Santa for a dog every Christmas. I asked my parents for a dog every birthday. Did not get a dog. They're like, you have little brothers. You don't need a dog. Um,
Oh yeah,
but
that's the
then
same. Yeah.
totally the same. My poor youngest brother went by Cookie Dog until he was like 9 years old. He fetched and everything. It was great. But we eventually got a family dog when I was in like in 8th grade because we like moved houses and a dog like came with the house. And it was just like a 7-year-old dog who came with this house because the dog
Oh,
had lived there their whole life. Like the dog had lived there their whole life. The first owners had abandoned the dog there. The second owners were like, we can find a new home for the dog, but we can't take her with us. And we're like, we will take the dog. So
oh my
finally got a
gosh.
dog as like an 8th grader.
Oh my
But
gosh.
I've always wanted a dog. Like this is like a thing in my life. I was like, I don't need friends. I just need this
Yeah.
one creature. Um, and so when we were actually living in Bozeman still, our landlord at the time told us that we could get a dog. And then I got into grad school and I was like, okay, we can't get a dog. I've got to go to grad
Um,
school. But
yeah.
his name, our landlord's name was Peter, and he kind of like had
I know
like
that's name.
a cattle dog personality. And so I was like,
Oh,
we'll name a dog after this guy who said I could get one. Um, Fast forward to 2020 and the pandemic. Um,
yeah.
we moved in with really good friends of ours who bought a house, and
Um,
we had lived with them for like 2 weeks when I asked if I could get a cat. I was like, "Can I get a cat?" And they were like, "I mean, if you want one." Um, and then I was like, "What about a dog?" And they're like, "Yeah, like you can get a dog." And it's funny because the couple we moved in with was like a girl that I've known since she was about 8 years old. We grew up in tiny towns near each other in northern Wisconsin, and her boyfriend, who I had like just met like 4 months before. Um, and so I like pulled Olivia aside and I was like, is Eric actually okay with me getting a dog? Like, is he actually okay with it? Because I don't want him to feel
yeah.
bad for me because like I'm a family friend that like you've known for forever. Like I want him to be honest. And she's like, no, he's okay with you getting a dog. He just doesn't want to take care of a dog. And I was like, fair, we can make
Fair
this
enough.
work.
Mm.
But again, it's June of 2020. And there is not a single dog available for adoption in all of California because
Oh,
it's June of
God.
2020 and everyone adopted a
Yeah.
dog. You know, they were home from
Yeah.
work, they could finally have a dog. Blah blah blah
Mm.
blah blah. Those poor dogs now. Um, and so I was scouring the entire state trying to get a dog, and I would get approved for a dog, and they're like, "Yeah, you can come in September to look at
Mm.
dogs." And I was like,
Um,
"September? It's July. Like that's I don't want to wait 3 months.
mm.
I can finally get a dog. I'm not waiting." Um, And we found this international rescue group um, that brings in dogs primarily from Taiwan. Though there are groups that are
Okay.
similar that bring in dogs from like Korea and China, for examples, and they generally
Yeah.
fly these dogs in to San Francisco,
Okay.
Seattle, and Vancouver because there are massive Asian populations in in these cities,
Right.
and they're traveling
Mm.
back and forth a lot. So they have a volunteer network of like veterinarians
Wow.
in Taiwan and in Korea and in China. And these dogs are fostered with families there. And then
Mm.
people who are flying back and forth to see family will volunteer as like passenger dog carriers. And so
Wow.
that you can check in, apparently, as an individual person, you can check in 6 dogs, like in like to be under the plane. Um, and so like all in their own crate. Obviously, there's not
My
six
God.
dogs in one crate,
Oh, yeah.
but basically so that's what happened. We like met this international dog rescue company. They like or organization. They were like, okay, we'll approve you for a dog. And they're like, which ones are you interested in? And I was like, oh, this one or that one, like not our dog. And they're like, oh, cool. You said you're a runner. We think that this dog is the right dog for you. And we
Nice.
were like, they're like, she's kind of like, she seems like pretty active.
Mm.
She seems high energy. And so I was like, fine, that works. Like we'll take her. We show up to we showed up to San Francisco International, SFO, and like this dog is just like standing in her crate, like really excited to see us.
Oh,
Um, and it's our dog Petey. and we named her Petey after our former landlord, Peter,
Nice.
because he said I could get one. And while she does love running and going with us when we bike, like mountain bike, she is such a couch potato. Like they told us that she was like a high energy and she like hates when I get out of bed before the sun comes up and like she'll like she's a couch potato. Like I feel like I stole her from the good life. Like the good life was like living on the streets in Taiwan where she could like eat whatever she wanted and lay in the sun all day and not go for runs. And now I like make her go for runs and she gets 2 meals a day and she like, you know, is just like, oh, this princess. So we have this
Yeah.
really funny, quirky, weirdo dog from Taiwan. So she kind of looks like a pharaoh dog or a dingo. Um, she's got really big ears and a really long face, and she's super silly. And she truly is like I joked that I was gonna get a dog and she was gonna be my best friend, and she is like 100%.
Yeah.
Like, I
Yeah.
mean, like how running is not therapy, like getting a dog is also not therapy, but they like definitely help.
Yeah, yeah. She's very cute. I've seen videos of her. I did not know that whole backstory there. That's so cute.
Yeah.
Oh, I can't imagine trudging. If I was one of those volunteers that I can't imagine trying to trudge 6 dogs through an airport, that's complete madness.
Yeah. I think they have a lot of volunteer help, but it's,
Yeah.
yeah. So if you live in San Francisco or Seattle or Vancouver, they are really fun dogs. And also like
Mhm.
any sort of village dog is also kind of really fun and cute. Like
Mhm.
there's these like cool dogs in Spain, like
Yeah.
Pendencos, I think is what they're called. And like the
Yeah.
UK, for example, is like one of the adoption hubs for them. And they are also super
Yeah.
weird, super cute, interesting looking dogs. So you might not be able to get a dog from Taiwan, but there are options out there for you.
There are. Yeah. I keep thinking about it. So you need to reassure me. As like a busy couple, not just person, how do you balance everything? I mean, you travel a lot.
Mhm.
Does Stephen look after her while you're away? Like, how do you manage? I know it's not a child, but it's like a child.
It's like a
How do you
child.
manage the care? Yeah.
Yeah, that was actually my selling point to Steven when he was like, I don't want a dog. I was like, well, like, he's like, well, it's just going to change our life. And I was like, you think a kid's not going to change our life? And he was like, oh, good point. So like that got him on board. But you're right, because when I'm gone, like he might be home, but he's not like home because he's working a lot as a
Yeah.
medical resident. And so it's a combination of like his work schedule. We're super fortunate that we live about 2.5 hours away from his parents, and they love
Um,
PD. And so we'll meet in the middle. Like I will drive 90 minutes to go meet up with them to
yeah.
like give them Pete for 2 weeks. Um,
Yeah.
we also have a great like group of friends here in Seattle, several of whom also have dogs. And so we do a lot of
Mhm.
dog care share. So if Pete just needs like a walk and dinner, we have two sets of friends who live around the corner from us and they'll like take her out for a walk or feed her dinner. If we need someone to
Nice.
watch her for the weekend or for, 4 days, we've got some other
Mm.
friends who have dogs that we share dog care with. So we are fortunate that we're not like paying a ton of money for like dog
Mm.
sitters, but it's a lot of like trades. Like, oh, like our
Yeah.
friends just took Pete for us to be gone this past weekend, and we are like, oh, are you're traveling over Thanksgiving in a couple weeks? Like, let us know if you want us to watch your dog for
Mm.
you, type of thing. So, the trades happen a lot. It like just like with a kid, it takes a village. Like it takes a village.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's ideal. You've got a really
Yeah.
good support network. That's like my sister and her boyfriend. He, well, our mum can't really, my mum has arthritis, so looking after like a stronger dog would just knock her straight over.
Mhm.
But his parents are able to take their dog for the weekend and stuff. I really ought to just ask to share their dog instead of going. He's high energy. I could go running with him.
A
Um,
dog share is good.
she's like 2 hours away. It's doable. It's doable. Okay. What's the time? What time are we on? I've got about 20 more minutes with you. I want to get the questions in. I'm gonna choose. Okay, actually, I want to talk about your podcast then. How did you meet Keely and Hillary, and how did that come together? Because you've been doing it a really long time now.
Yeah, I think we only put out an episode every other week, so that makes things easy. But um I've known Keely and Hillary for longer than the podcast has been around. I've known both of them through the running community. Keely and I met at my first 100K, 50K. 50K. We ran Chucking Up 50K together, and then we ran Forge 100K together the follow like 2 weeks later. So we were and
Nice.
had to race against each other. So we met
Yeah.
that way and had a bunch of kind of friends between the like again the like north of Seattle all the way down to Portland area, like this group of kind of running girls who would like get together.
Mm,
That Keely and I got kind of brought into right away, which is amazing.
yeah.
Um, so knew Keely quite quickly through that, and then knew Hillary as well through the running space. We had similar coaches. Um, we were racing some on similar circuits. I think we might have met in person for the first time at Transvolcania in 2017, May of 2017, and that was the year that she had that really bad fall and accident later
Yeah.
that summer because I really wanted to be part of the
Mm.
Skyrunning World Series, and so I went to
Oh
Transvolcania for
yeah.
that race. Um, and so met, I think Hillary and I were staying at the same hotel and we were two of the only Americans staying there. And so we like hung out all week because it was like, oh, you're my friend. You're from the US. Um, and so have been pretty tight ever since. And we're all also friends with Dylan Bowman, who runs Free
Oh
Trail.
yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
and I think that Keely and I and Hillary all kind of separately had a conversation with Dylan about starting a podcast and like getting his help with like kind of editing and launching it and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And he was like, no way. All three of you kind of want to do the same thing. Would you consider doing the same thing together?
Yeah.
And so Dylan kind of helped us in a way of like just being like, oh, like you idiots, you're all friends. Like, why aren't you talking to one another? And so pushed us towards one another, and the three of us have been podcasting ever since. Hosting a podcast with three hosts is a chaotic schedule at best. Keely's now
Yeah.
started medical school. Hillary is traveling a
Mm,
ton. Like even more, I travel a lot, and Hillary travels more than I do. And
mm,
so scheduling can be a bit of a nightmare. But we
mm.
we all wanted to like do a women's focused podcast that really kind of like also had a lot of science and a lot of
Oh,
scientific
wow.
topics covered and a lot of things that felt taboo. Like we wanted to talk about,
Mm,
you know, relative energy deficiency and menstrual dysfunction and return to sport postpartum, some things that we were familiar with and some things that like none of us had kids, so none of us can like really
yeah.
speak to that. And we're all the same age basically. So we haven't, none of us are menopausal. Um,
Mm,
but we wanted to cover topics that we didn't think got enough light. And it's grown and kind of expanded from there. So we do interviews sometimes. We have science topics that we're super fascinated by. We're talking about our own experiences. Like we're recording on Thursday this week, and we'll talk about my experience at Javelina, and then going to interview Hannah Allgood for the episode, who just had
yeah.
an amazing second place finish there. So
Mm,
we feel fortunate that we get to kind of do a little bit of everything, but it's been really cool. The growth of it's been really fun, even though we're only doing it every other week. So you fall in like the podcast rankings every week when you do it that way. But
yeah.
from a sustainability standpoint, it's been good to keep it sustainable. And um, I think this episode, like the next episode's like 86 or 87, which is a lot, knowing that we only do it every other week. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's been super fun, and it's been a lot of like lessons learned too, as far as like organization and communication and
Mm,
um, yeah, making sure we're all on the same page. So it's super super fun. And it'll be curious to see like as Keely gets further into medical school, as Hillary travels, like what it might evolve into.
yeah.
But it's nice to have three people really just kind of like engaged in a conversation.
Yeah. And how much, like, what kind of portion of your time would you say is allocated to that at the moment?
Um, probably only a couple hours a week, just because it's like
Uh,
we're only doing it every other week, which makes it easy.
yeah. Yeah.
But, it's something that we're all talking about investing more in as well. And if that happens, that would change, that time element of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just curious because I really, really enjoy the mixture of science and different topics that you have. Because you're all really well informed. You're all in the running world, but you make it mostly the science topics, I guess I'm referring to. You make it accessible for everyone, I think. Like I come away feeling like I understand a topic much more. Like I just listened to the Red S one. I mean, no one can really understand Red S fully at the moment because of the lack of research and yeah, lack of knowledge on it. But yeah, it's amazing that that's only, well, not only, I know it takes a portion of your time, but a couple hours a week isn't like killing you, but you just must retain so much knowledge in your head. It's like, do you just read something? Are you one of those people that just reads it and it actually sticks? Because I can hear it and it goes out the other ear. I don't retain.
I feel like I'm kind of a freak in the sense that like it's all like we just consume a lot of that information, right? We're
Mhm.
like listening to it, we're reading about it, we're and what I really liked about grad school was actually like not was about like writing like lay abstracts where you had to write an abstract that was like
Yeah,
understandable at like the high school level.
yeah.
Understandable to for your friend's mom who like high school science, the most science they've had type of thing.
Mhm.
Um, because science should be for everyone. And so
Yeah.
the science communication element is really important. And we're fortunate in the sense that like, you know, we all have scientific backgrounds.
Mhm.
Hillary's got her master's degree in neuroscience. Keely worked at Nike for like a decade in wearable
Mhm.
tech, and was a science major during undergrad and has done other research. And so I think that we all have a lot of science in our background as well. And so it's kind of like if you had to ask me about the Krebs cycle, could not tell you how the Krebs cycle works. That was
Yeah.
in one ear and out another. The periodic table of elements, no idea. But these things that are like
Yeah.
applied to our lives and to the athletes that we coach and to our friends,
Yeah.
um, it feels a bit more like easy to adapt into kind of like everyday conversations.
Yeah. I guess, are you using elements of your degree? I mean, surely you must be in your own coaching and training, do you find?
Yeah, and I think I'm probably the biggest thing I'm probably using is like just like having high science literacy, like the
Yeah.
ability to consume this information and have it and have takeaways from it. Like to consume the
Mhm.
information and then come out the other side with like tangible things that I can, you know, talk to with, you know, I coach this like 70-year-old guy who's just wonderful, but like, you know, I can like turn around and say, okay, like this week we're like, or like this block, we're doing this and this is why we're doing it. So it's like
Yeah.
science literacy and being able to consume new information and turn it into applicable, like real learnings and tangible pieces of the puzzle, I think is probably like the biggest use of my degree. Also just being able to like consume a lot of information very rapidly because you like you're
Mhm.
drinking from a fire hose in grad school. And
Yeah.
so I think that that's probably like the most actually like applicable
Yeah.
skill learned.
Yeah. Well, it seems really useful. I think from what I've seen online, I feel like quite a few coaches are actually quite good at that, or the coaches that I know of anyway. Like I don't know whether it's, is it Megan Roche or Megan Roach? Roach or
Roach.
Roach?
They both, yeah, I feel like their name is very French, but they don't pronounce it very Frenchly. So they pronounce it more like the bug than
Okay.
in French.
Okay.
So yeah, so Megan and David Roach, who are awesome. I've been texting with
Yeah.
David all morning, after his amazing race over the weekend. But
Yeah.
yeah, they're so cool. And like the Huzzah
Yeah.
Hub stuff that Megan is doing with another woman named Megan, the two Megans, is again science communication, right? It's like
Yeah.
taking
Yeah.
complex science topics and making it digestible and understandable for all of us. And that's a skill.
Yeah.
That's like a skill. And um, yeah, it's really important because a lot of scientists are not very good at talking about what they do.
Oh,
And
yeah.
it takes yeah, science communication experts um to like really break it down to lay science. I've
Mhm.
done a lot of writing work in that space. Like contract writing work for like the Quantitative Biosciences Institute, which sounds so freaking fancy, but it's a program at UCSF in San Francisco that kind of like partners different labs together to work on projects. And so they'll need a press release about something. And
Yeah,
they'll contract
okay.
me to do the press release. And it's hilarious because I've got to
Yeah.
like, I have to like study to interview the lead researcher to like, and then
Yeah.
during those interviews, I'm like, okay, so this is what I think you're doing. And then I'll like explain their research back to them and I'll be like, is that right? Like, tell me if I'm right or not.
Yeah.
And so it is, yeah, it's like, it's hard to make things super approachable, but like it should be. Science again should be for everyone.
Yeah, I 100% agree. That sounds really interesting as well. You have so many things. Okay, I think I'm gonna move on to the last question, if that's okay.
Let's do
The
it.
embarrassing story question that I warned you about at the beginning, and I've always looked forward to it. So yeah, either running related or non-running related. What's your most embarrassing moment?
It's like so hard. Like when you said that earlier, I was like, oh, I wish like an immediate story came to mind. And I think that we'll finish recording and I'll be like driving to my PT appointment and I'll be like, oh, I should have said X. Um, I don't get embarrassed really easily, I think is part of it. Like, I think I'm just like, I was like a theater kid, you know, like I was a musical
Okay,
theater kid. And so,
yeah,
like, I
that's
have no shame and I'm like just kind of an embarrassing person. Like, I'm going to be an embarrassing mom, you know, type of thing at some point
yeah.
in time. Like I remember we had these skating parties growing up at the ice rink, and you would just like they'd play music and you'd like skate around in a circle at the ice skating rink. And like my mom and like two of my really good friends' moms would just like be up, they'd be like DJing it and they'd be up in like
Oh
the
my
booth and they
gosh.
would be like dancing to it. And we'd be like, oh my God, our moms. And it's like, whatever, they were having a great time. So I feel like my embarrassing moments are probably something super dumb. Like I remember accidentally, and given that I remember this, it's probably why it's embarrassing. Um, and it's so silly. But and I think about it every year when like all of our peonies, which are like giant beautiful flowers, bloom in our yard. But my mom had brought in peonies for me to give to my teacher. And I'm sure you've all done this, but like you're a little kid and you're really excited to like tell your teacher something and you call them mom,
Oh yeah.
you know, and they're like, Mom, and you're like, I mean Mrs. Clark. And you like try to like brush it under the rug really quick so that they like don't know that you called them mom. Or that your friends don't know, like your classmates don't know that you called them mom because it was so
Yeah.
mortifying.
Oh.
Like I remember doing that as like a third grader, being like, Mom, and then I was
Oh.
like, uh, so it's like that's so dumb, but like I remember it still.
Oh.
Like I'm
Yeah.
34 now, and I'm like, when I was 8 years old, I did X. Um, because it's like I think so much of our sport is just kind of weird and like, I could be embarrassed by like having to go to the bathroom during a race and it being like really uncomfortable, but it's like everyone
Mhm.
poops. Like
Yeah,
everyone has
everyone
that
does
happen
poop.
to them. Um,
Yeah.
I guess the other in hindsight embarrassing thing I did was I was coaching for CTS at the time. Jason Coop was my boss effectively, and I was newer to the job. And
Mhm.
we were running a camp for athletes. That some of them that we coached, some of them that we didn't, who were coming into Colorado Springs for like a long weekend to train. And I had been working out of the office for 2 days. Like I came in early to like meet with Jason and like I was gonna lead some of the runs. And so he wanted to show me some of the route. And so I came in a couple days early to like get on the route and like know what I was gonna be doing for the weekend. And I'd been working in the office for a couple of days, and the guy who used to own CTS was named Chris Carmichael. And like I met him on like day one of being in the office. Like, I was like, Jason was like, oh, like Chris, this is Corinne. Corinne, this is Chris. Like, good to meet you, blah, blah, blah. No big deal. And then we're like setting up for campers to check in on like Friday morning or something. And like there's some other coaches who haven't been there during the week who are now there as well. And so Chris Carmichael comes through and he like is introducing himself to all the coaches. And he gets to me and he's like, "Oh, like I'm Chris." And I just I shook his hand and I said, "I know." Like did not say like did not just be like, oh, Chris doesn't remember who I am. Like like great to meet you, Chris. I'm Corinne. Um, I just was like such a snarky, embarrassing person. I was like, I know. And he was, I was just like, poor Jason was like dying, I'm sure, as like this like really annoying, like, I was probably like 25, 26, probably
Yeah.
26. And I was just like this shithead who told the boss, like the CEO of the company, like I was like frustrated that he didn't remember me. And like the dude's got a lot of other stuff going on. And so that's like that's definitely like in hindsight, like was like kind of an
Yeah.
embarrassing, like icky thing to do. So yeah. Calling my third grade teacher mom and telling Chris
That
Carmichael,
really
I
stuck
know.
with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those were not so great moments for me.
I gotta say though, I bet the teacher, it must be a really nice moment when you call them mum, right? It must be like, oh, they love me, you know? Like, I'm sure
Yeah.
it's not as bad as you think. Um, but yeah, okay. We didn't cover everything I wanted to cover because I have too many questions and you do too many things. But that was really, really good. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me. I know how busy you are. Um, so yeah,
Yeah.
is there
Thank
anything you
you.
want to add?
No, I mean, I think that was amazing. If people want to get a hold of me, I'm really easy to get a hold of. I say that you'll
Yeah.
like get an email from me that'll be like, I'll talk to you in a month. But like I'm just at Corrine Malcolm on everything. I don't even think my
Yes.
name is capitalized. Like it's like I should like lowercase everything. So I'm easy to get a hold of. People can slide into my DMs. Happy to field questions or whatever people might need. But yeah, this was really fun.
Yes, thank you. I will also add you can find the Trail Society podcast really easily on Spotify, which I would recommend. It's like the perfect length for an easy run. So yes, please go listen to that. Yeah, thank you so much, Corinne.